It's really good to see you all. And I've been asked to use the time here during the Bible class to give an update on our work in Brazil. I think it's been 4 years since the last time that I was here. Some of you are new, and so I'll take a little time to give some background information, and then we'll get on to some more of the more current information about how the work is going down in Brazil. If we make it till August 10th, we will have been there for 23 years. When we moved down there, we intended to be there for 3 to 5 years. Somebody said that sounds kind of like a prison sentence. I guess we changed that to 3 years to life, because now it sounds like we're probably going to be there the rest of our lives. A few years ago, Benita and I met Bob Waldron. Some of you know Bob, down in Florida for lunch one day, and he was very interested. He's been to Brazil a few times. He's quite interested in how things were going. And then at one point, in Bob's kind of deadpan way, he looked straight at me and said, "Now, Dennis, do you intend to end your life in Brazil?" I said, "I don't think I worded exactly that way, but that's probably what's going to happen." Anyway, let me give a little bit of background. I'm going to have to kind of look and see what's behind me here because I don't have the computer down here to be able to look at it. But just some background information on the country for those that maybe haven't been here in previous visits that we've made. Brazil has a little 200 million people in a land area a little bit larger than the 48 contiguous states of the United States. Very diverse culture, climate. We go from the southern part of the country that is outside the temperate zone. They actually get a little bit of snow in some parts of the southern end of the country, up to the northern part, which is actually in the northern hemisphere. So we cross the equator. We have recently moved, and I'll show that later, we've recently moved across the Tropic of Capricorn. So we now, for the first time in my life, actually live in the tropics. But we don't get as hot as you get here. We live at about a half mile of elevation, and that moderates our climate quite a bit. Overall, in these 20-some years that we've been there, we've seen significant improvement in the economy. That's overall. The short-term story is that the politics and the economy in Brazil are a total mess. The political situation, for any of you that follow international news, just to have an idea, the previous president is pretty close to being indicted on corruption charges that most everybody in his party is involved in. The current president was his protege. She was a minister in his cabinet before she was elected. Now she's in the process of impeachment, and while she's being tried in the Senate, she's removed from office temporarily, and her vice president put in her place. He's from a different party. It was a coalition government, so he took over and he named his cabinet members, 7 of whom are under investigation for corruption. So I'm not sure how that's supposed to help things. It is a mess. We are hoping it does not become a violent mess. So far, most of the demonstrations have been very peaceful. There have been quite a few of those. I don't know. Anybody here planning to go to the Olympics in Rio? Neither am I. I'm going to stay in São Paulo, but a long way away from that. But it has been quite complicated, especially in the last couple of years. Primary religious influences, of course, Catholicism is the primary religion throughout South America. However, in Brazil, in the time we've been there, we've seen the percentage of Catholics drop from something a little around 90 to probably about 70% or a little less of the population. A lot of people are leaving the Catholic Church. With the new South American Pope, I'm not sure what that will do. I think probably they will hold their numbers a little bit better. But I also think that the more conservative Catholics are more likely to start questioning things. And that may open up more opportunities for us in that respect. After the Catholics, the next group or groups would be what are referred to as the neo-Pentecostal churches. These are basically the TV preachers that are constantly preaching the health and wealth gospel. And there's some pretty big denominations that preach that kind of a message in Brazil. That's been the groups that have grown quite a bit in the last 20 years or so with this decline of the Catholic Church. In the 20 years that we've been there have been a number of North Americans involved in that work. Some of those on site. There have been several men or families who have moved down and lived for a period of time, anywhere from a few months. One family that was intending to stay longer, but their daughter developed juvenile diabetes, and they ended up moving back to the States so she could be treated here. Others that have lived there for 2, 3, or 4 years over the years. At this point, there's only one other American preacher that's working with us, and he's getting ready to move back to the States in October of this year. So we're the ones that got the life sentence that have stayed there. Others have managed to get out after 3 years or so and come back to the States. And several men that some of you probably know. From a distance, there's been a great deal of North American participation over the years. The congregation here, actually I was thinking this through. Arnold can probably correct me if my memory is not accurate, but I believe that the congregation here started helping us in our support in 1981 when we were in Ohio, and continued in the time we were in Ohio, Michigan, and Illinois, and has continued throughout our 22 years in Brazil. I believe that this congregation has helped in our support on a continuous basis longer than any other. And I thank you for that. I thank God for you in that kind of help that you have given so consistently. There's been a great deal of participation of North Americans to enable us to do what we're doing in Brazil. Of course, our concern in long term is to see Brazilian churches, Brazilian preachers, and that's where we have focused our emphasis. As we've been able to take the gospel out to more and more places, there have been people converted and congregations started. We have contact with and involvement with about 35 congregations throughout the country. We've helped to start most of those. All but maybe 3 or 4 of those we've been involved from the beginning. And so what happens, obviously, is people obey the gospel and these congregations are formed. We've also encouraged Brazilian churches to choose and support Brazilian preachers. We have never asked an American church to support a Brazilian preacher because we feel like it's more important in the long term for them to make those decisions and them to be involved in that work from the outset. Probably a little slower approach, but I think in the long term it will be a more effective way of doing that work. So part of our work is trying to help equip men, help to train men, and that's something I want to focus on. If the Lord gives me a few more years to be involved in this, I want to be able to focus on that a little bit more in whatever time I might have left to be involved in it. Most of the congregations we work with do not have men supported to preach on a regular basis. Many of these are very small congregations. Some of you over the years have gone out to preach in smaller congregations around the area here. Now, there are plenty of those, several of those in Brazil, but they're scattered out over an area, land area the size of the United States. And so in most of those situations, men who work secular jobs to support their families are also doing the teaching, the preaching. And so we're thankful for a number of people who are very dedicated with no kind of financial interest at all in that. Not sure what I'm doing. Okay, there we go. Just a little bit about the contacts that we work with. And to give some ideas, some background on that. Primary contacts, I think almost always are the best ones. Primary, by that I refer to what we might call warm contacts. People we know personally. And especially new converts are often very good at getting opportunities to study with people that they know personally. When somebody is converted and realizes what that means, he wants to tell his family, he wants to tell his coworkers, he wants to tell his neighbors, he wants to tell everybody because he has just found the most important thing the most important treasure he could possibly ever receive. And so that's the normal thing. Within a year or two, generally that new convert has worked through those personal contacts. He's talked to everybody. He's invited everybody. And some of them have maybe accepted studies, others have refused, but he's pretty much run out of those opportunities. And so we then start to work with other contacts that come through other sources. And I'm not sure whether I'm in the wrong position here. Okay, I'll try both sides and see if it works. And when we moved down there, we didn't have those warm contacts to work with when we first moved to Brazil. We didn't have relatives. We didn't have coworkers. We had new neighbors. We couldn't talk to them. We weren't speaking the language very well. So we started early on using printed material, and then later we went to the internet, and I'll talk quite a bit about what we've done with the internet over those years. But we've used a lot of printed material over the years, continue to use a lot of printed material that we mail out, hand out, try to get it out to people as much as we can. The internet is displacing that as far as importance because more people are getting access to that. Almost 5 years ago, a man who was converted came through our website on the internet and obeyed the gospel. He runs an auto repair shop down in what they consider a small city in southern Brazil. It's got 100 and some thousand people. But he runs an auto repair shop there. And so one day, the local newspaper editor brought his car in to get it fixed. And this guy got talking with him, and he said, you got different columns in the newspaper. The Catholic priest has a column, and got these different ones. Do you ever think about a column, maybe just call it, what does the Bible say? And so he pitched the idea to this editor, and the editor liked the idea. Well, the fellow wasn't just pitching the idea. He said, I know somebody that could write that. He runs a website, and he does quite a bit of writing. I think if you get in touch with this guy, he might just accept the idea. So after a while, I got an email from this newspaper editor, And this week I sent in article number 488, I think it was. For the last almost 5 years, 2 articles a week, and they're not charging us anything for this. This is a normal column in the newspaper. 2 articles a week. It's a tabloid-sized newspaper. It's a half-page article, 2 different times a week. So we've been talking quite a bit about what the Bible says over these nearly 5 years. And everything that goes in the newspaper also goes onto our website. So we have at least 2 new articles a week going onto the website from whatever other work we might do. Internet, I'll mention it very briefly now, and then I'm going to go into more detail. The internet has turned out to be, by far, our most effective way of reaching cold contacts, reaching people that we don't know. About 1995, Carl Hennicky, who preaches in Jefferson City, Missouri now, got in touch with me and gave the idea of taking the material we were putting into printed form and putting it onto a website, creating a website. And when I moved to Brazil in 1993, I had heard of the internet. We started using it almost immediately for email. My dad told me about how he said, this really, really neat things come out now. You're going to be able to send a letter to somebody across the ocean, and the same day they can respond to you. And that was what I knew about the internet when we moved down there. So we started using emails. And at the time Carl floated this idea, I don't think I had ever used an internet browser. I don't think I knew anything about doing anything more than email with it. But he said, you can put this stuff out there and people will be able to find it. So I started sending the files. He said, not very many people use the internet in Brazil, but who knows, maybe somebody will find it. I don't remember how many weeks or months it took until the counter on the website got up to 1,000. 1,000 visits to the website. And of course, I was all excited about that. That takes about 50 minutes now to get 1,000 visits to our website. And I'll get to that in a few minutes. We've also, in the last few years, started working with videos. The technology keeps developing. Some of you know a whole lot more about that than I do, but we try to use some of these things. So we embed videos in our website that are run through YouTube technology for that. Anywhere from just 3 or 4 minute brief messages, sometimes to a full sermon or a full Bible class. We've tried a little bit of everything. And those are now getting about 1,000 views a day, the videos that go onto the website. Social media. We put together a team of women to take whatever the feature article is on the website and put it out on social media. The feature video, we change those every day. Even if it's just recycling through old material, we put up a new feature article and feature video on the site every day. So they put that out on social media and usually pick up a couple of other articles and put them out on social media. So it goes out on Google Plus and Facebook and Twitter. And so these women have been very, very helpful in that, trying to use what has become a very popular means of communication in the world, getting it out to more people through that means. So we talk about cold contacts, in contrast to those personal contacts. Typically, what gets people searching is some sort of frustration. They're in a church, but they're seeing things that they don't believe are right. And so they decide they're going to look elsewhere. That certainly has happened with some of you. They might be facing some kind of a crisis in their own life. Maybe an illness or death of a loved one, something gets them to start asking those why questions. And so they start searching for something. And of course, today, many times that's done through Google or some other search engine that might bring them to making contact with us. Or it might be that somebody gives them a flyer, strikes up a conversation with them on a bus and says, you might want to look at this, and leaves them with something before they get off the bus. But whatever means, most of these people end up coming to our website one way or another. And so much of what happens from that point on, they can come to the website without identifying themselves. They can come and look, and a lot of the people that come look for a few seconds and are gone. But others will stay and will look and sometimes read and watch videos and stay on there for hours. So a lot of times those contacts will come through the website, and eventually some of them will make contact with us. It's a pretty small percentage. But a pretty small percentage of the numbers that I'll show in a couple of minutes still turns out to be significant. They might send us an email, or they might fill out a form on our website, or even send us a letter by mail. Or they might show up at public Bible studies that we do somewhere. We do open public forums throughout the country. We've done them in every region of the country. We've done them in the majority of the states in Brazil. And we still try to get out. The last couple of years, I've been focusing on doing them mostly where there are congregations already established. partly because we were spreading so thin it was difficult to keep up with it. And so we've been trying to work where there are congregations already established to help bring in new contacts that also can help to bolster that local work. And of course, our website is what draws most of these people in, but brethren will also go out passing out flyers and making personal invitations to bring people to those studies. And in some cases, that leads to conversions. And in some cases, then, if there's no congregation where those people are, that'll lead to the beginning of new congregations. That's kind of the process that we see for much of the work that we're involved in, of getting to these people in some way or another, eventually getting face-to-face with them. Because as much as we can teach through the internet, there's still a need for getting face-to-face and being able to open a Bible and study with people and deal with their specific situations for them to be able to come to an understanding of truth. Now let me kind of take a pause here to see if there are any questions up to this point. I'm going to go on with some things about what we're doing with the internet especially. But questions about Brazil or the general background of the work or these processes with contacts.
So you the general, like if across the country, are you kind of your website and your material that you're putting out there are the vast majority of Christians pointing people to that site, or are there others doing similar things?
There are some others who are doing things on a much smaller scale, but our site would be a reference point, so to speak. And a couple things about it. This is not a church website. This is a Bible studies website. So it's not presented as the work of any local congregation. In fact, it's not presented as the work of a church. It is a Bible study site. So if somebody goes to that, they'll see that the website manager is Carl Henneke, and that my name's on there as being responsible for content. So yeah, it's much broader scale than a typical local congregation might be able to do. And when you ask about others doing similar things, frankly, for somebody to do something similar is going to take them years, because we have been accumulating material on this for 22 years nearly. So it is a tremendous volume of material, which is one of the things that brings us so many hits on Google searches. Our site's outdated as far as the technology, but because of the amount of contact, it gets a lot of hits. I'll show some other information here. One statistic that I don't know where it came from, but one Brazilian brother said that he was able to find an analytic thing that among religious websites in the Portuguese language, that ours was third most accessed in general. And that's mainly because of volume of material over a long period of time. The profile, Jim's interesting, is mostly toward middle age and down, mainly because of the use of the internet. Of course, that's creeping up as time goes on. More older people are using the internet. Those who started when they were 45 are now 65, and they're still using it. So that age bracket is creeping up somewhat. But I think the biggest concentration is probably what you describe as middle age, followed by younger, and then by older age groups. Yeah, good question. Others? Oh, I'm sorry? Yes, sir. Yeah, around 35. Yeah.
In that period of years, have you seen it grow?
Oh wow, you got me, Bob. I'm not a good statistician. I don't know. I know we have had several hundred conversions at least over these years. But I don't have numbers. Of course, some of those in these various congregations scattered around, and some have fallen away. Some have moved off to the United States or other places. We lose them sometimes to places that don't need them as much as we do. But I'm sorry, I really don't have good numbers on that. And I probably won't be able to recover them either at this point in time. Other questions? Okay, let me give some information about the website. Not because I think it's the only thing by any means, but I think it does help to see what's going on. And frankly, I think most of us get kind of encouraged when we realize that there are still people that are searching for something. It's easy to sometimes get discouraged and feel like nobody cares. Nobody wants to hear the gospel. Well, that's not the case. There are people that want to hear the gospel. And I think some of the numbers I'll show here help to illustrate that fact. As I said, our site is quite simple. We've talked about revamping the site But that is a massive project to try to do on a volunteer basis. We've just never gotten it off the ground. So we continue to work with a site that is pretty simple. Maybe that's one of the benefits to it. It's nothing glitzy. And so as people come to it, it's content. It's not so much something that's going to wow them with the technological characteristics that are there. Just some background information. 2/3 of Brazilians now have access to the internet. So even though not very many knew what it was back in 1995, they do know what it is now. Brazil is fairly high in the ranking of countries as far as the amount of access to the internet. And that's only talking about Brazilian. There are Portuguese speakers in other parts of the world. And so this map's a little bit small there, but if you can see where there are red or white dots, that's where people have accessed our site. I don't remember the interval of time on this, and this was only the ones that have come through the main page. A lot of other people go into the site through other doors. So this is more just a representation of the geographic distribution, not of any real numbers. The numbers themselves would be much, much higher. But you can see on that, of course, all of Brazil, except for a little green spot back there that's called the rainforest. I guess they don't have broadband internet yet in some of the tree houses. But other than that, all of Brazil has significant representation. Quite a bit from the United States and Canada. And again, not numerical, but geographically, looking at that, you can see the United States is the second country on the list of those that access our website. There are quite a few Brazilians living in the United States, and that would be the primary audience there. Followed then by Portugal. They speak Portuguese there also. Quite a bit different than our Portuguese, but they do speak the language over there. And then beyond that, it would be nations from Africa, Asia, people from Australia, scattered throughout the world that we get contacts that come in. But the vast majority from Brazil, which is obviously our focus as far as being able to follow up effectively at work. A little bit more information on that. Last year was really exciting to me for this reason. We had 6 straight months that our site got over 1 million visits. And as we come into this year, I think I've got the data up here. Well, I'll get to that in a minute. Just comparing 2015 with 2011, we saw about an 80% increase in 4 years' time, which is more rapid than the increase in access to the internet. The site is growing faster than the internet is growing in Brazil. So it's been very encouraging to see those kind of numbers continue to grow. Like I said, back in '93, I didn't know what the internet was. So these are numbers that are pretty big to fit in my little brain. But it's interesting to see the opportunities that presents. I should have updated this past week because we're now into June, so the May stats are also available. And May was another over 1 million month. So we've now had, I believe that's 9 out of the last 13 months that we passed 1 million visits per month on the website. And we're headed to an average this year that'll go over 1 million a month average throughout the year if it continues the way it is. Now, 80% of those people are off within about 30 seconds. They hit the site and leave. It's not what they were looking for. But if you could get even 1/10 of 1% of 1 million to stay for an hour and look at different things. And we do get things like that. We get, I don't know the exact numbers on this, but we do get people that stay for hours on their visit and are looking at different things going around different parts of the site. Videos we've been using for the last few years, and last year we had an average of almost 30,000 video views per month. Oh, to put that into terms that we can understand, the minutes watched helps with that. You know, until a couple decades ago, I didn't know much of anything that we could do to teach while we were sleeping, unless it was through printed material. That somebody could be reading something you wrote while you're sleeping. But now through these videos, what we're doing is basically teaching 4 people at a time around the clock throughout the year. It's a passive teaching method. Once it's prepared and put on there, that it continues to reach a pretty high number of people. Okay, before I go on to information about public studies, about all that website stuff, usually there are some questions about some of that. One of the most common ones is, do you think we could do this with a website at the local congregation where I worship? And the pat answer to that is no. It's not a local church website. There's some characteristics about it, and I think there's some characteristics that are cultural that make a difference. Do you guys still get a lot of junk mail in your mailboxes? I probably get besides bills, I probably get 15 or 20 mail a year in my mailbox. Brazilians don't get junk mail. The companies don't use that method of advertising hardly at all. And so printed material has been more effective for us from the early on because we're giving somebody something they could read free. And the internet has gotten to be the primary source of information. So I think there's some cultural differences even that would have an impact on that. Plus the question of how do you accumulate that amount of material? That's not an overnight project. This is a decades-long project that's been involved. Questions about all that?
You think the fact that it's not direct, that it's generic, in its approach, pulls down some of the barriers to why people are willing to go take a look?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I think if we had presented this as a website of a Church of Christ, that our numbers would be much lower than what we see now. It's seen as a Bible studies website. That's what it is. And that's what we want it to be. Now, obviously, we want to bring these people to study the Bible and to make a decision to obey the gospel and to worship with a local church. But what we're presenting to them is an opportunity to study the Bible. And we put right on there that our purpose, we're just Christians. We want to encourage people to study the Bible and to live according to what it says. Now, initially, they don't know the implications of that. They'll get to that if they continue studying. Yeah. Others?
Is Catholicism the only religious influence, or is there? I mean, obviously there are other religions there, but it's primarily.
Catholicism is the biggest influence, although many Catholics are nominal Catholics. They were born Catholics and they say they'll die Catholics, but they don't live Catholics. They just, in name, are Catholic. Pretty much all, Brazil does have religious freedom, so pretty much all the different Protestant evangelical denominations are represented. The largest of those numerically is the Assembly of God, and then several other of the neo-Pentecostal groups, some of them homegrown. Their two brothers-in-law started their own denominations back about 30 years ago, and then somebody split off from one of those. He had moved up to the point of being a bishop or an apostle or something in one of those, and he branched off and created his own. And those are the three big ones on TV. One of them owns, the original of those owns one of the major television networks. I'm not talking about a local radio TV station. I'm talking about national network. One of them owns one of the networks. So they have a lot of access to the media. Constant teaching of the necessity of tithing, and that when you are faithful in tithing, you will be blessed financially, you will be blessed with good health, et cetera, et cetera. And people buy into that. Some people will sell their houses to donate the money to the church, expecting that they're going to get rich from that. And when they're out of money and they start to question, now they're troublemakers, so they're kind of pushed out the back door, but there's three more coming in the front door believing the same thing. And that's what keeps them going. They have a high turnover, but they keep funneling people through. So just kind of draw out of them what they can get and then dump them out and get somebody else. It's a sad situation, but a lot of gullible people are caught up in it. Some of them, though, open their eyes. And so some of them go from the Catholic Church to one of those churches. There they start to open their eyes. Some months, our number one search word on our website is tithe or tithing. And I think it helps to illustrate how many people get fed up with that. And they're looking to see, is this really what God requires of me? And of course, they get to our site and we say, no, that's not the point. It's give as you're prospered. But it gets them to looking at other things then, starting with that.
The country more receptive than other parts of the country?
Yes. The North and the Northeast are more receptive than the South. Yeah. Well, I have a theory about that because that's flipped from what you would expect in the United States. Typically in the United States, we think of the people in the South, further south as being more open, more receptive, further north being cold. I lived in Michigan for a while. I've got a theory on that. Two aspects to it. One of them is climatic. The climate affects how cultures develop, especially before the invention of air conditioning. Before the invention of air conditioning, if you lived in the South in the United States, where were you on a hot summer night? Out on the front porch, and your neighbor was out on the front porch, and so you talked to your neighbor. Others would walk by. You were outside the house, and you built more social relationships outside the house. If you lived in the north where it was cold several months out of the year, you spent more time inside your house. So what we saw when we lived in the north, if you get in somebody's house, they treat you fine. Getting in might be a little more difficult because they don't have quite the openness. In Brazil, the climate is reversed. The south is the cold part, the north is the hot part. And so that same tendency is kind of reversed down there. And I think that also is something we see in migration patterns. Those who migrated from other countries, Europe, for example. If you came from the northern part of Europe where it was cold, you probably went to the northern part of the United States. If you came from a more Mediterranean climate, you were more likely to go further south. And if you came from Africa, you were more likely to settle further south. And in Brazil, that's all reversed. The ones that came from northern Europe went to southern Brazil. So there's more blonde hair, blue-eyed people in southern Brazil than in northern Brazil. And it's partly because of those migratory patterns. So we're probably replicating some cultural tendencies that go back centuries. So yeah, I think there are reasons for that. There are places in northern Brazil that I can go out on the street passing out flyers, and 99% of the people that pass me will take one. Sometimes they'll even stop and wait for me to get another one out and give it to them. I go to the southern part of Brazil, and the number is probably more like 10 to 20% will take them. Just a difference in the cultural outlook. Now, once they study, once they obey the gospel, they do fine. But getting to them may be a little more difficult. So those are my theories. If somebody wants to do a research project for your master's degree sometime, see if there's anything to that, I'd like to read your thesis afterwards. Yes.
Sister-in-law is from Brazil. I'm thinking somewhere around Rio. I'm not positive, I think so. But when she was here, we were talking, and there were some words that she did not know how to translate. Your website is it? I'm assuming it's in Portuguese. Do you have that problem with? And you said like Portugal has a different type.
Yeah.
With that barrier of different areas translating different, or?
Yes, translation is an art. It is not an exact science. Google Translate is doing pretty good, but they have not put my daughter out of work. She's a professional translator. There are nuances of translation that there are times when you have to describe an idea because an actual word won't fit. The same thing in Bible translations. We deal with the same thing. As we look at different Bible translations, we recognize that there are times that they didn't translate the word, they translated the idea because we just wouldn't understand the word. And so that certainly exists between Portuguese and English, probably between any two languages. There are going to be some specific things that just don't translate very easily. Oh, yeah. Yeah, if she's Brazilian, she would understand it with no problem at all. Because all of the content of the website is in Portuguese. I do all my teaching, preaching, and writing in Portuguese. Most of my study. I told somebody when I get asked to do a meeting in the States, I have to dust off my English Bible to do that because I do all my study in Portuguese. Just rarely refer to something in English. So it would all be in Portuguese. She would be able to access that. And you're welcome to give her our site. Yeah. I don't guess I have it up there anymore. But it's open to whoever wants to look at it. Other questions down to that point? I think we got about 5 minutes here. Yes.
When something goes wrong in your country, for example, like a mass shooting or something, does it seem like you get more views at that time on your website?
Good question. I've never tried to correlate that, so I don't know the answer to that. I've never seen a blip that would be big enough to get my attention just looking at the overall daily stats through the month. But I'm not sure how big a blip it would have to be to really draw attention. When you're getting 35,000 visits a day, 40 is a normal thing to happen once in a while. 27 is normal. So I don't know how big a blip we'd have to get for that to even show up on our radar, so to speak. Interesting question, though. There are more mass shootings in the United States than in Brazil, though. In fact, statistically, Paden City has a higher murder rate than the city I live in does, for last year. Is that not correct? There was one murder here, first one in decades, perhaps. Statistically, size of the town here, our murder rate is less than 10 per 100,000 last year. So actually, where we live has gotten safer over the years. But yeah, the crime rate overall in Brazil is worse than in the U.S. But the statistics can be manipulated to say just about anything you want to say. Our public forum studies, I want to just kind of briefly go through that, a little bit about our move, and we're running out of time. We do those in neutral locations, similar to the approach of the website. We don't usually do these studies in a church building. We'll do them in a school building or a a community center or a conference room of a hotel. Study marathons for economic reasons. Instead of renting a place for 4 or 5 nights, we do Saturday and we do, or a holiday, and we do all day studies, 6 or 7 hours of studies, question and answer periods. We advertise those through the website and other means, and we usually try to work with topics that will challenge people. My philosophy is that many times I have one shot with somebody, and so I've got to take advantage of that. And I can't start through a verse-by-verse study of Isaiah in the 6 hours I have with them. I've got to choose something that's going to try to get people challenged to want more, want to study more. Okay, I'm not sure what I'm doing wrong here, but make this work. Maybe. Oh, okay. I didn't plug my computer in, and the battery's about to die. So the problem is the computer now. It's not this. I got 10%. I think I can do this part, and I'll plug it in. Preaching the gospel is obviously about people. I've given numbers, statistics, but these are examples. The 2 pictures on the left of some of our public forum studies. The one on the right of intensive studies we're doing at the congregation there in Sao Paulo over the Carnival weekend each year. And it's about reaching people with the gospel. I'll just tell you one story out of these different pictures that are there. The guy with the glasses sent me an email a few years ago, and when I get those emails, I'll typically try to figure out where the person is and often pass the contact on to somebody closer to where he is geographically. So I looked at the area code. Started out with 51, the phone number he gave me. 51 is the area code that covers Porto Alegre down in southern Brazil. There's a good congregation there, so I passed his name along to a brother there. Started studying with him, corresponding with him, having good studies. Finally got to the point that he said, okay, now exactly where do you live? Figuring he'd say, what neighborhood of Porto Alegre he lives in. It's a pretty good-sized town. He said, I'm in Canada. Guess they have a 51 something area code up there, too. He is Brazilian, but he was in Canada doing an English course, and started studying while he was up there. So what's the problem? So this fellow that was studying with him said, we're going to have some intensive studies here in a few weeks, and he told him the dates on it. Gary Fisher was making a trip to Brazil, was going to do those studies. So the guy bought an airline ticket, flew to Porto Alegre, got off the plane, and I'm not sure if it was the same day or the next day he was baptized. Next day he was baptized. And then he said, you know, I'm supposed to go back and finish that English course, but that's not really important. This is important. So he went to Canada. And he was doing the English course to help him on his government job in another state in Brazil, 1,000 miles or so away. He said, but that's not really important. This is important. So he gave up his job. He now works a job making maybe 25% what he used to make. But he has stayed there where he could be with Christians and be involved in the work. Where he was from, there was no congregation we would have been able to have recommended for him. Stories like that encourage me. And I think it's helpful to see that people are searching. We're going to throw this up real quickly, and if somebody wants to talk to me about it later. Benita and I have, after 20 years in the big city, have moved to a smaller, more rural community, trying to position ourselves from being able to continue to work effectively as we get older. My average speed on my car computer in Sao Paulo over the last few years was 22 kilometers an hour. It translates to about 14 miles an hour. I can deal with the frustration of that traffic at my age now. I'm not sure how I would do with that in another 15 or 20 years. So we've chosen to go someplace that we think will be able to more effectively work, especially in training preachers and training others for that work, as well as being able to get out for our own travel to airports and highways to be able to get out from the city. Thank God for you, and thank you for your participation, your involvement in the work in Brazil over these last 22, almost 23 years. Thank you.